This is your Wednesday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Hope you're having a good day out there today. Happy Carlos Correa News Conference Day to those who celebrate. He's going to be doing that this morning, probably right around the time you could be listening to this podcast. Twins making that official on Tuesday and introducing him to the world, at least to Twins fans, on Wednesday. So that's exciting. Part of a flurry of moves that we've talked about plenty of times here. And another one, Vikings landing Za'Darius Smith on Tuesday. We're going to get to that here in just a little bit as well. Sarah McLellan, Star Tribune Wild beat writer, will join me here in a little while, too, to talk about all the moves that team made, including the trade for goalie Marc-Andre Fleury and what that means for the stretch run, what that means for Cam Talbot, what that means for the goalie rotation, and all of the moves that Bill Guerin made at the deadline to try to give the Wild a chance to be a better playoff team this season. So we'll get to that with Sarah in a little while, and we'll have some extended thoughts on kind of the whole swirl of all of these moves happening as well. But first, what did I miss? Like I noted at the jump, Vikings got Za'Darius Smith, formerly of the Packers, another border crossing for a former Packer player coming to Minnesota, signifying to me, though, more than just that. It's the spending of money on a outside defensive free agent, which they've done a little bit on the defensive interior line, and they spent on Patrick Peterson a year ago, but really since they've, in the last few years, they've kind of really leaned on Daniil Hunter, and that's kind of come back to hurt them a little bit. I know they made the panic trade for Yannick Ngakoue in 2020 and then made the panic trade to get rid of him 6 games later. But, the efforts to pair somebody up with Daniil Hunter, ever since Everson Griffin, kind of gotten to the backstage of his career, have been a little bit lacking. And so this is the first move made by the new regime. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, all the assistants underneath him, and in tandem, I would imagine, with Kevin O'Connell wanting, taking input from the new head coach. What kind of players does he want on this team? This is the first real departure move, is kind of the theme I have for this Za'Darius Smith signing. They spent a lot of money. It could be up to, $14 million a year, something like that. Don't know exactly how much is guaranteed. They reportedly had to convert that Daniil Hunter contract into convert that roster bonus into a signing bonus to clear that cap space needed to sign Za'Darius Smith. But, I was getting a little bit, I don't know, worried is the right word, but I was getting a little bit concerned that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was under instructions that he couldn't do as much as he wanted to this roster. And that still might be the case, because a lot of what they've done, as we've talked about on this show, as we'll talk about later this week on Access Vikings with Andrew Kramer, is largely keep last year's roster intact. They redid Kirk Cousins' deal. They kept Daniil Hunter, like I just said. They restructured Harrison Smith. They restructured Adam Thielen. A lot of these veterans who they could have made hard decisions on and hit more of a reset, and they didn't do that. They've brought back a lot of the same guys, and their moves in free agency have been pretty modest. Harrison Phillips for the interior line, Jordan Hicks at linebacker. Good, solid players, but not necessarily splash moves, and certainly not a complete change in direction for the defense. But now you add Za'Darius Smith, who figures to maybe be a linebacker, an outside linebacker in this 3-4 scheme that they're going to run. You pair him with Daniil Hunter and get those guys after the quarterback. That's not a wholesale change, but that's a change in philosophy, and that's a bigger outside move than they had made so far. So, I like to how on Tuesday they snuck in the Sean Mannion has re-signed thing too. If they'd just done Mannion on Tuesday, this would have been a different show on Wednesday. Mannion's fine. I know Kirk Cousins is very durable. If the season, if he got hurt, the season would be in jeopardy anyway. So, and Cousins likes Mannion, whatever, that's fine. But if they would have just done Mannion, this would have been an even more of the same kind of offseason. So good timing on Za'Darius Smith. Sounds like he was motivated to come here. The money was right. The familiarity with some of the staff was right, including Ed Donatel. A lot of the things that they're going to do here are similar to what probably he's been used to in the past. So it all made sense. He gets to play the Packers a couple times a year, and those revenge games are always fun. Just ask Brett Favre. Just ask Ryan Longwell. But more than that, to me, this signifies a departure in this offseason, and the first one that I had seen evidence of so far.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake for 24/7 gaming, fun restaurants and bars, and luxurious hotel rooms. And join Club M to bask in the rewards. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is playday.
Let's welcome back Sarah McLellan to Daily Delivery right now, someone who's been very busy, about as busy as our Twins writers lately with the volume of moves the Wild's been making. I guess the difference there is they're actually playing meaningful games in the midst of all of these trades. The biggest one, Sarah, obviously coming Monday right before the deadline with the acquisition of goaltender Marc-Andre Fleury, last year's Vezina Trophy winner, of proven, multiple Stanley Cup champions. How's it going? You catch your breath a little bit from everything that happened Monday?
Yeah, it was definitely a busy day for the team, and quite a contrast from last year's deadline when the team, didn't pull off any moves, kind of stayed with the same roster. And obviously that culminated in that first round playoff Las Vegas. And now, a year later, to see the strides, the growth, the progress, this was obviously a team that Bill Guerin, clearly endorsed with these moves and, bolstering it for this playoff run. So a lot can change in a year. It can.
And a lot can change even in, 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, maybe go back to like mid-February before they hit that slide. They've been playing pretty well, and both of their goalies had been playing pretty well in tandem, both Cam Talbot and Kaapo Kähkönen. Kähkönen, of course, traded also on Monday, ostensibly to make room in the goalie depth chart. He wasn't going to get much action as long as Cam Talbot and Fleury were here, but they hit that dry spell where they lose 10 out of 14 or something like that. There's a shootout loss in there somewhere, but how much do you, even though Guerin, a week ago said you don't trade your way out of problems, how much do you think both the potential the Wild had shown in the beginning of the season and then that slump they had hit, how much did that motivate him, do you think, to make so many of these moves here?
And I think the play early in the season probably stands out a lot. I think even internally, too, for the players. I think Ryan Hartman had a comment the other day that he said, that's who they thought they were. The funk was out of character and was not, indicative of who they are. They believe they're that team from earlier in the season, it sounds like. So I think there was always kind of that reminder, that this is what this team is capable of. At one point, it was atop the NHL standings, and then also had that, 10-game point streak after the Winter Classic. So there was obviously evidence and proof of how well this team has played. But I think then, that slump, I think it just probably reinforced too, like how well this team is when it does play to its identity, and how can this team get back to doing that. And I think these moves clearly reinforce that and maybe better position the team to play that way. Because I think that was probably what was most jarring about that skid, was that the Wild didn't look like the Wild. This was a team earlier in the season that I think did to other teams what Calgary did to it in that couple game, where they just looked overmatched. They weren't tough to play against. They were pushed around. And it just didn't seem that, the competitiveness and that edge was there. And so I think obviously the moves can better position the team to play that way, because not only is that how the Wild can have success and clearly is kind of formed to produce and play, but that obviously the track record shows is the way that teams have success this time of year into the playoffs. The St. Louis's, the Colorados, Calgary as well, obviously emerging as a contender for the Stanley Cup this season. That's the style of hockey that is going to be at the forefront the rest of the regular season into the playoffs. And if the Wild wants to compete with that caliber, it has to play that way. And I think obviously Guerin's acquisitions, were executed to help the Wild withstand that standard the rest of the way.
I'm going to get to some of the skaters in a minute. I don't think we should overlook them. And some of them have already made positive impacts with the team, particularly in that win over Vegas on Monday. But the Fleury acquisition, getting a goalie, and I think after the Tyson Jost trade, which was the first of these many moves, Guerin had met with the media and was pretty frank about kind of the state of the team, and had said, in response to a question about do you need to go get a new goalie, said not necessarily, but he said he had confidence in these guys even if the numbers weren't saying he should. At what point did you start to pick up on this is something that's a real possibility that they could go out and make a goalie addition, even though they seemed to have a thing going with Kakkonen and Talbot?
I think recently leading into the deadline, but this was obviously something that was on Bill Guerin's radar much prior. He acknowledged that he inquired about Fleury a couple weeks ago. So that puts, right around that time when the team's kind of sputtering, and, that was obviously an issue at the time, some leaky goaltending, and there were leaks all over the lineup. This wasn't just on the goaltending, but earlier in the season, the offense was outscoring maybe a lot of those miscues in its own end. And obviously that scoring had also kind of dried up in that post All-Star break slump. So I think it became more exposed. And so, that obviously conversation happens and Bill Guerin explores that possibility. But even in the last few days leading up, he said it kind of went back and forth whether or not this would come to fruition. Fleury obviously was in control of his future with a no trade clause, which he obviously waived to facilitate this move to the Wild, but also the cost. This is an organization that values and has to value first round draft picks because of the looming salary cap implications of the Zach Parise and Ryan Suter buyouts. They obviously are going to need players on entry-level deals to fill out this roster in the coming years when their financial picture is restricted by those buyouts. So, to potentially lose a first-round pick is difficult, but in Guerin's mind, it's worth it if it means a Western Conference final appearance, which is what would have to happen for the Wild to lose a first-round pick, as well as Fleury being in net and posting 4 wins through the first 2 rounds. So a lot to consider, but obviously with someone of that stature and experience level, especially in the playoffs, this is an acquisition that certainly, like you said, addresses an issue that had come up, especially in the second half slump to start. And now, the Wild has 2 goalies the rest of the way that probably share the workload and try to, obviously prepare the team for the postseason.
They did recoup a second-round pick right in the McBain trade, so I wonder if that, in Guerin's mind, squares things a little bit or makes it a little easier to, think about giving up a potential first-rounder. Like you said, he'd probably gladly give up a first-rounder if it meant that they had the level of success that would necessitate giving up that first-rounder. So it seems like a worthy gamble. I think you kind of just answered what I was going to ask you next, but I was kind of curious, how does the goalie tandem shake out now? I mean, Cam Talbot's accomplished. He's played really reasonably well this year. He was an all-star, and he had a little slump, but he's won a bunch of starts in a row. Had a shutout on Monday, and we've talked plenty about how they probably need 2 goalies down the stretch because of the compressed schedule. But do you think one of them will emerge as the guy going into the playoffs? And how do you think they handle that?
Results probably will dictate that, and that's kind of been the MO so far. The Wild has kind of already been using somewhat of a 2 goalie system. It was kind of, it looked like a 60-40 split, maybe in favor of Talbot versus Kakkonen so far. But I think a split makes sense the rest of this regular season. A lot of games in, pretty much the same amount of days, quite a few back-to-back. So I think it makes sense to have some type of rotation there and especially get Fleury integrated. But if Talbot continues to play like he has lately during a 6-game win streak, he's probably going to continue to merit face time as well. And then that kind of, maybe puts it in a situation where whoever's, playing better. That's even the best way to say it. But, whoever emerges from, this type of splitting the crease, if that's what happens, gets anointed the game one starter. But, it maybe looks like a tough decision, but I think for the Wild, they don't mind that opportunity or that, position to be in, to have to pick, one out of two if they're both playing so well. And so I see an opportunity, I think, for both. And maybe that's what it takes. I think so many years we saw, just such a clear hierarchy, a 1, and a 2, a starter and a backup. And I think, nowadays more with the workload and, managing, ice time and games in a compact schedule, especially these last few years, we've seen more of a split in net around the league, I think, with some teams. And maybe that's the way that the Wild finds its success the rest of the way.
That was, for Wild history buffs, their most successful postseason ever. It was kind of a goalie split. It was Dwayne Rollison and Manny Fernandez back then, if I'm getting my goalies right. I hope I am. It might. Okay. I think that's right. If it's not, I will correct myself later on in the show. But it was for sure a goalie rotation back in the day. Maybe it can work again. But goalie wasn't the only thing they added. Tyson Jost was the first domino to fall. They added some more muscle, it seemed like, with some of those other moves, and paid off right away with a goal from one of those newcomers on Monday.
Yeah, Nick Delorier obviously made an instant impact with his team debut. Not only the goal, the game winner in that victory over Vegas, but I think just his style of play. He arrived as advertised and exactly what the Wild was seeking. A hard presence on the ice, kind of that sandpaper bite, finishes his checks, obviously brings in exuberance and an energy that, seems to fit in seamlessly with this locker room and this team. But that line as a whole, I think that line, the fourth line now with Tyson Jost and Brandon Duhaime, has an identity that it's going to be a tough shift. And the Wild has really prided itself on all season, rolling all four lines, having that balance and depth. And this just, I think, solidifies that. And that's a line that come playoff time or, a St. Louis Blues matchup later in the season with seeding on the line in the Central Division, that's an assignment that could be very tough for an opponent. There's the Kaprizov line, and then there's the Fiala and Boldy combination, and then there's the Jordan Greenway, Joel Eriksson Ek, Marcus Foligno line. And then you're going to have to play a Nick Delorier, Brandon Duhaime, Tyson Jost line. That's going to be hard and physical to play against. It really, like I said, looks like the Wild is rounding out its game to play playoff hockey. And I think that's really is the next step for this organization. As I said, the team didn't make any moves last season at the deadline. It wanted to keep, a team that had maybe obviously exceeded expectations last season. It was a transitional season, but give them the opportunity to see how far they can go. They got to Game 7 against a very physical, tough Vegas opponent. And now it's what's the encore? What's next? Can they bridge that gap? Can they get better? And obviously it's clear they are trying to learn from the past and adapt and get better. And now they're shaping up to try to see what they can accomplish.
Seems like this benefits Marcus Foligno to a certain degree. There's a lot expected of him from both, scoring output this season and also from a physical standpoint. If there was a fight to have, it was oftentimes him being put in that situation, even though, that took, a relatively skilled player off the ice for the Wild. Just in listening to his comments the other day, sounds like, he recognized they need some of this from that Vegas series, and also maybe just to kind of take some of that pressure off of him.
He has evolved his game, obviously, in his tenure with the Wild. And, the role that he maybe started with was probably very similar to what Delorier was brought in, to bring. But now he is part of this team's best matchup shutdown two-way line. This is a line that scores goals and prevents goals. So when he's in the box serving a 5-minute penalty for stepping in on behalf of a teammate or, getting physical and having to, pay the repercussions for that, 1/3 of the Wild's most effective line is iced. So obviously now I think, and you're right, Delorier acknowledged that. He'll serve that. He will serve the penalty and keep Foligno on the ice. And so you're right. I think that just speaks to the evolution of this lineup and recognizing that the Wild is better when, Foligno's on the ice, that line's on the ice, but it still wants to play with that bite. And now this is obviously a player in a line that can help supply that.
Fleury seems like a bit of a character from his from the first meeting he had with you guys. Does that seem accurate to you?
Like I said, very energetic, seems to like fit right in, bring that exuberance. And he actually goes back with Foligno. They both played in Buffalo. So there's a history there. It sounds like he's familiar with quite a few of the players on the Wild. So I'm sure that just eases the transition. He's obviously dropped into a playoff race from Anaheim, which is obviously rebuilding, has been struggling. So I'm sure that comes with kind of like that breath of fresh air, that fresh start to come in. But yeah, he seems to fit in, and I think that play on the ice as well just reinforces that. It's kind of contagious, I think, that energy probably amongst his teammates and the fans. XL Energy Center was so loud Monday night after he scored and celebrated. And, that's the other component. This is a grind. This is the tough part of the season. This is the make or break stretch. But I think finding that balance, too, of just enjoying the process and realizing that, yeah, it's every other night, it's back-to-backs, but still having that energy and enthusiasm for it, that's something else that he can help bring and that the Wild could essentially feed off of.
All of these newcomers are joining a pretty good roster. Kirill Kaprizov, not that he's going unnoticed, but maybe overshadowed in the last few days just by all this trade news. He's got 32 goals. I believe he's up to like 76 points now, closing in on the team single-season points record, which is a modest, I think 83, which is not a high total, but still one that he should be able to get this season, and challenging for the goal record too, which is shared by Marian Gaborik and Eric Stahl, I believe, at 42. So he's got 10 to tie that in a little over 20 games, which kind of is the pace he's on. Everything is advertised this year. He's been, even when the team was slumping, it didn't seem like he was really a part of it.
I think it was really interesting to see how he would respond this season to a full season. Obviously, last season was shortened, due to the pandemic. But how would he respond to, a complete season, full travel, playing every team in the league, not just within your division? And I think he is totally impressed for this to only be his second year and to be chasing down, records that have been in place for quite a while, obviously. And two, you look at the company that he's in league wide, these are numbers that could obviously put him within the top 10 in scoring in the league. And I think too, what maybe doesn't get, pointed out all the time is a lot of his production is at even strength. It's at 5-5. He is not just piling up these points on the power play, because the Wild's power play, obviously, we know has struggled this season. He is one of the most effective contributors at even strength in the NHL. And I think that obviously speaks to his talent, his skill, how he's integrated into this lineup. But it really is impressive what he's accomplished and the records that he is closing in on and getting close to so early in his career. It makes you wonder what's next, the rest of these ensuing seasons, if he just continues to maybe shatter his own performances.
Final thought for you, Sarah McLellan. What, as we get down the home stretch, this final quarter of the season before the playoffs, like what are you going to be watching for in addition to just what we've seen in the first 60-plus games this year?
I'm really interested to see if the Wild can play to its identity consistently. As I said, that's when this team has kind of found itself in trouble, when it's departed from that hard-nosed, hard-to-play against, box-out style and that north-south game. And it's a tough way to play. It's grinding, but it's successful. So can they get in the habit of deploying that style every game and maintain it into the playoffs? If so, we've seen the Wild, prevail against some of the best teams in the NHL this season. And on the flip side, if they can't play that way, we've seen some losses that have obviously stung the team. So can they get in the rhythm of playing the way they have to play on a nightly basis? And if so, they might be a team to watch come playoff time.
I've got some great news for you. The trade deadline has come and passed, so you won't have to cover any more trades, probably just these games and what should be a fun rest of the season. Sarah McLellan, thanks so much for joining me here today.
Thank you.
It was good catching up with Sarah McLellan. I feel like it had been a few weeks and a lot had happened to the Wild, for the Wild, since we last talked. And of course that, all the moves they made before the trade deadline certainly warranted this, this catch up with Sarah. And I think she's right in a lot of respects. Always does a great job, talking about this team and writing about this team. But just the confidence Bill Guerin showed in this team and the moves at the deadline probably reflective more of the team that they were at the start of the year and not this slump that they had, this identity that they've had for most of the season. He was rewarding that more than he was panicking over a loss of that identity over that, whatever it was, 15-game stretch. And so now, like I said on the other show the other day, no excuses, right? They've got the pieces. They didn't make, a ton of big moves with skaters, but it seems like the moves they've made make sense, give them some help on the penalty kill, give them some help on, some toughness, being able to be a little bit more rugged. And then, of course, the addition of Marc-Andre Fleury gives them such a presence in net and such a, he and Cam Talbot now, whoever's the hot hand, that can be who you ride into the playoffs and through the playoffs. And again, it doesn't guarantee it's going to work, but it gives you a much better chance. One additional interesting thought I had, by the way, when I thought about Za'Darius Smith is both the Twins and the Vikings have, made some pretty big moves in the last week. And the caveat with a lot of what's happening with those teams is the clause, if healthy. Za'Darius Smith and Daniil Hunter could be one of the great, pass rushing tandems, but both of them have had injury problems. Smith barely played last season because of an injury. I think it was a bulging disc. Daniil Hunter didn't play much last season, missed all of the 2020 season with that neck injury. When healthy is going to dictate a lot of what happens with the Vikings pass rush, and frankly, is going to dictate a lot of what happens with the Twins. Carlos Correa and Byron Buxton have both had their share of injury problems over the last, several seasons. Both of them, high impact players. If they can be on the field for 130, 140 games apiece this season, that will go a long way to determining whether the Twins ultimately have success this season or whether they're putting together a team that's intriguing on paper, but not really is going to accomplish much. So you got to watch for that. I mean, injuries, durability. Bud Grant used to talk about it all the time. Just what that means. It's an underrated aspect of Kirk Cousins. Let's be honest. Whatever you want to say about Kirk Cousins, he is on the field. He plays, and even if he's only the 10th or 12th best quarterback in the NFL, he's better than Sean Mannion, who we talked about re-signing. He's better than other alternatives, and he stays on the field. He has that history, and that's kind of a big deal. So watch for that this year. Both of those teams have put a lot of stock in players who have a ton of talent, who have had a ton of production when healthy, but they need those guys to be on the field and to produce this season. Let's finish with the cooler. Fascinating story. Ash Barty, 25 years old, on the top of the tennis world, has retired at age 25. The thing I think is really interesting about this is not the first time she has walked away from tennis. She says she's burned out right now. She did that like 7-8 years ago too. She was, she had been a Wimbledon junior champion at age 15 a decade ago, and then it got to be too much, and she was overwhelmed by the pressure, the travel on the tour, things like that. So she walked away, played professional cricket back home in Australia, and then got back to tennis, and then all of a sudden has won 3 Grand Slams. So I love when athletes are able to do this, when they take stock of what they want to do in their lives, what's going on in their lives, how they feel about their sport, and then they don't feel like they have to continue playing something just because they're really good at it. That's a good lesson for life. Like, you can, she might decide in a year that she wants to come back, that she misses it. She's certainly young enough that she can keep playing. She's only 25. But if right now that's the right decision for her in her life, we should applaud that and take that as a lesson in our own lives as well. That will do it for today. Should have plenty of men's and women's basketball talk on Thursday's show as the Sweet 16 heats up. That will do it for me today. I'm Michael Rand. Talk to you again on Thursday.